if there was pressure, if the U.S. were helping arm Ukraine to the teeth, Russia would be more interested in negotiating because there would be no end in sight. Trump has, in fact, delayed the cause of peace for, in my view, at least 6 months, maybe a year, until all these different events play out.
If you're a supporter of President Trump, you could argue, look, finally, someone is trying to do something. There is some energy here. There is some action here. There is some diplomacy here because, I mean, the war can go on forever if everybody wants it to, but to whose benefit?
This is a question I ask myself: am I missing something? Could I be completely off the mark? And can this actually evolve into a peace deal? And the conclusion is no. The book that I wrote takes a look at the last 35 years of relationships, and there's been some degree of consistency between Republicans and Democratic presidents catering to Russia first, because Russia is a larger economy, has a massive conventional military and nuclear arsenal, to try to keep Russia on sides, being friendly. And what I see is Trump taking these mistakes of the past and amplifying them in a uniquely Trumpian way that doesn't get us any closer to peace. Why? Because he fundamentally misunderstands Russia. He misunderstands that for Russia, it is essential to subdue Ukraine and bring Ukraine into the fold. The Ukrainians are not in a weak enough state, and nor will they be in a weak enough state to capitulate, and therefore there is really no room for peace. Trump could give away as much as he wants or attempt to. The Ukrainians actually have to agree to it, and they're not going to. And the Russians are not the least bit interested in any kind of compromise.
So the war will go on.
The war will go
If
on.
your theory is correct.
Well, it unfortunately, I'm pretty good at this, and I wrote an article in Foreign Affairs just a month before the war started, saying this is going to be a full scale war that's going to drag on for some time. To me, it's crystal clear that the Russians do not feel sufficiently weak to negotiate. They could have, if the U.S. had maybe advanced a much more assertive policy of supporting Ukraine, ratcheting up sanctions, indicating that Putin was not going to have any chance of winning this war. We could have started moving towards a dialogue. Instead, we're actually eliminating leverage over Ukraine, because the more the U.S. cuts support, the less interest the Ukraine has to be compromising. We're cutting our relationships with the Europeans, eliminating leverage there, and we're giving away the farm with regards to Russia. So leverage on all sides just disappearing.
So if following that train of thought, then would it be better for Ukraine if the US did walk away, and somehow the Europeans up their defense spending, up I don't know what, pressure on Russia?
We might be headed in that direction, but the U.S. should stay engaged as long as possible, because the Europeans can't fill the gap. Right now, part of the game is for the Ukrainians to keep the U.S. engaged as long as possible, support in place as long as possible to give the Europeans time to ramp up. There are other formulations here. I think one of the aspects that is clear to me is that the U.S. will continue to sell material. It doesn't want to continue to give aid as it has been unfolding over the course of the past 3 years, but it would be happy to sell, and that means that both the Ukrainians and the Europeans can buy in the interim until the Europeans produce enough material to provide Ukraine directly.
Okay.
The way things are now, I mean, realistically, where do you think all this is going? All these talks and the pressure on Ukraine to sign a minerals deal, where are we going to be in a month's time, in a year's time, do you think?
Well, according to Donald Trump, there's going to be a peace deal this week, right? Initially it was supposed to be before he was inaugurated, then on day one, and then it was a hard push over the course of the first several weeks. That didn't materialize. It's a pipe dream, because the Russians are very, very comfortable in believing that they could string along a Trump administration that's grasping at straws. But for Russia, the urgency is more along the lines of squeezing Ukraine, helping drive the wedges between the U.S. and the Europeans as much as possible, undermining NATO. So there's not a huge amount of incentive for the Russians to actually deliver. They could mouth the words of ceasefire and peace, as they've done numerous times. The Easter peace didn't materialize, but it's something for them to easily be able to manipulate Trump
So when the Kremlin suggests possible bilateral talks between Moscow and Kyiv,
Yeah.
is that BS?
I would like to believe that there is some merit to this, but the conditions on the ground aren't ripe for this. The Ukrainians don't feel sufficiently weak to compromise and give Russia what it wants, which is a declaration of Ukraine no longer in NATO, Ukraine disarming, Ukraine granting these four provinces to Russia. That's not really going to happen. For Russia, there doesn't seem to be the incentive to compromise just yet. If there was pressure, if the U.S. were helping arm Ukraine to the teeth, along with the Europeans, if sanctions were being ratcheted up, Russia would be more interested in negotiating because there would be no end in sight. Now, what they want to do is test the theory that even though they can't achieve their aims on the battlefield, they might be able to achieve them through their manipulation of Donald Trump. So that seems to me the driving factor, that we will have months and months of this playing out. Trump has, in fact, delayed the cause of peace for, in my view, at least 6 months, maybe a year, until all these different events play out. The Russians eventually will realize that they don't actually have the strength to subdue Ukraine, and that it's too costly, and that they'll have to take something less than the full measure that they want.